Welcome everyone to week number 5 in Science 200. I want to wish all of you a happy Thanksgiving this week. I hope that you have a great time with family and friends. And if you're having a rough time of it, I completely understand. It's been a rough couple of years for me too. But I hope that you do have a chance to celebrate with family and friends. At least go out and eat some turkey or something and have a good time, have a break from work, have a break from some school. So I hope that you get ahead of yourself this week or get caught up at the end of the week. With that being said, let's see what we've got going on this week. So last week in chapter 4, you learned all about scientific communication and how important it is to get your message across, being a scientist or being someone with a science message. And the first thing that you have to determine is who your audience is, because then you'll understand what they already know, their viewpoint, and then you can get the message across to them as you tailor your presentation to them. This is very, very important, and you're going to do this with your presentations also, and with your papers, but with your presentations at the end of this course. So this week is all about biases in science and how to remove them, how to check for them, because they're very important. There are all kinds of bias. So a researcher brings bias to the table when science is being done, because the researcher has done all this background information checking and reading and understanding, and so you have an idea of what is going to happen, but you also have an idea of what you expect to happen. And this sort of leads into confirmation bias. You are expecting some kind of result, and so that's what you expect to see. And sometimes you don't see that. And then you wonder, well, are you right or not? Or what is going on? If you deal with people, clients, subjects, patients, they will bring bias into the study. And so you have to remove that if possible. They know that you expect to get some kind of result, and therefore they are hoping to help you and give you that result. So that leads to bias. There's all kinds of bias, including who funds the study, because whoever's funding expects a certain result, unless it is something like the federal government. The National Institutes for Health don't expect any particular result from the work that you're doing, from the scientific research that you're doing. So you have to remove the bias if you possibly can. If you work for a big biotech company that's developing GMOs, you can bet that they are expecting a particular result from your research. This is another reason that scientific studies that are done by big companies like this are rarely published. For one thing, they don't want their secrets to get out. They don't want you to know their methodology. But for another thing, they realize that there is bias in this particular type of study. But they have to do these studies in order to show the FDA that whatever it is whatever their research is about is effective and safe. So that's why they have to do the studies. So how do we take out biases? One way is to set up a double-blind study, and double-blind studies are where the researcher and the subject, neither one knows who's getting whatever particular treatment. This is really important in clinical trials. It was important in the COVID vaccine studies. I was part of that, part of the original vaccine produced by Pfizer, and also the booster, the first booster that was produced by Pfizer. And what was interesting in that case was, of course, I had been given the placebo, but for the first several months. And so what they were finding in their preliminary results was that the vaccine was so effective that they had to open up the study, tell the researchers and tell the subjects, patients in this case, what the results were, and then they gave us the actual vaccines partway through the study, because it was being shown to be so effective. And so it was putting us at risk. Those of us who got the placebo was putting us at risk because we had not been given the vaccine. So double-blind studies are very important. Sometimes people think, I've been diagnosed with this type of cancer. I'll look to see if there's a clinical trial on new medications. That is wonderful, and people do that. Lots of people do that. I would be willing to do that. But the one thing that you need to understand is that you might be in the placebo group, in the group that does not receive the treatment. And that's the way these studies are set up. So that's the way that it happens sometimes. So double-blind studies are very important because it removes so much bias. The other thing that you need to do is look for the source of funding to see who is funding this work. Okay, also in Chapter 5, we talk about p-values. So P stands for probability. And what you're looking for is the probability that whatever this phenomenon is that has happened has occurred by chance. And so you want that p-value to be as low as possible. You want it to be 0.05 or less, and that means there's a 5% chance or less that whatever this thing is that happened just because of chance, as opposed to because of whatever your treatment was. So those are p-values, and they're sort of the opposite of confidence levels. So your confidence level shows how much confidence you have that this particular result is because of the effect that you are examining. So a confidence level, you want to be a high number, like 95, and a p-value, you want to be a very low number, like 0.05, 0.01, and that's a 5% or 1% chance that this happened by chance. So p-values and confidence levels are very important. Statistical analysis of your data is important to show that the results that you got did not happen because of chance. Also in this chapter, we introduced Gregor Mendel and his pea experiments. He was an Austrian monk, and Austrian monks don't have a heck of a lot to do except sit around and pray and read the Bible. So he was interested in botany, and so he started examining pea plants. Why pea plants? Because they grow really fast. They have lots of offspring. There were lots of different varieties, and farmers used them. So there were lots of different varieties. So he was studying pea plants, and in these studies, he was studying genetics because he wanted to know how inheritance worked. So when he set up his experiments, he was thinking to himself, there must not just be one copy of each trait in an organism, because sometimes you'll see a trait pop back up in later generations that you had early on, but then that trait disappeared. So there must be something else going on, and he figured out that every organism has 2 copies of every trait. And now, of course, we understand that. We understand that you get 1 trait from your mother and 1 trait from your father, and that some traits can be recessive. So he came up with that idea too, because sometimes traits were hidden in generations and then they showed back up in future generations. So Gregor Mendel was really important in the study of genetics until he became an administrator, which is absolutely hilarious. And then he quit his pea plant experiments. But the important thing that he did was that he collected data. He analyzed over 30,000 pea plants, which is absolutely amazing. He did this over years, but 30,000 results. And he came up with this idea that each organism contains 2 traits of each type, and that some traits are dominant and some are recessive. Now, don't we understand that? Yeah, everybody has that understanding now. And why did this come about? Because he collected data. And he statistically analyzed those data and figured this out from that. Also this week, you're going to be examining more about the Deepwater Horizon oil spill in 2010 and the difference between the results that the BP scientists were getting on how much oil was flowing out of this oil spill, as opposed to the governmental scientists who had no bias in this. The BP scientists obviously did. They did not want to report fully what was happening because damage control for the business, you know. But the research scientists said, no, there's at least 10 times as much oil coming out of this oil spill as you say from our measurements. And they had no bias in this. What did it matter to them if 10,000 gallons a day of oil was coming out or 10 million? What did it matter to them? It didn't, but it did to the BP scientists. So the importance of scientific examination without bias is shown in this Deepwater Horizon issue that you're covering this week in your web text. Okay, in week 5, you have no discussion boards. You're working on your rough draft, so you turned this in week 4, but now you're going to add 2 more sections, and these have to do with a hypothesis. So a hypothesis sounds a heck of a lot like a question, and you have to do that in week 2, right? So what's the difference? So a hypothesis can be tested. That question that you came up with in week 2 was an overarching question, a big question, like how environmentally friendly is an electric vehicle? How fast is ocean acidification happening? You know, huge questions, right? Are GMOs negatively affecting our health? So these are huge questions. A hypothesis is a much more focused question that you can design experiments around to answer this question. So that's the difference. You're going to have to come up with a hypothesis about ocean acidification, GMOs, electric vehicles, nuclear energy, whatever the topic was that you chose. And you're also going to have to come up with an explanation about how scientists would go about answering this question that you have. So you have to ask a question that can be experimented upon, that you can set up experiments to test, and explain to us how scientists could go about doing this testing. All right, so that's what you're going to add, but you need to revise what you have done in week 4 after I give you your feedback. Also, make sure that you follow your guidelines and rubric to help you with those new 2 sections. That's very important because the instructions, guidelines equal instructions. Rubric equals the grading. Okay. This is pretty cool right here. This is a picture that I took just the other day in Charleston, South Carolina. And Charleston is famous for the ironwork gates all around, and this one was decorated for the fall, so I thought that was kind of cool for this week. My tip of the week is to use your feedback from me to help improve your work and to do your revisions every week. This is how you improve, improve, improve. You will see the results of this in week 6. So in week 6, you will turn in your finalized paper, all of the research that you've done, all the questions that you've answered, come together in your paper for week 6. By week 6, I will have graded every bit of this. And so you have the opportunity to make your revisions and make that a perfect paper. Week 6 assignment counts for a lot of points. These points every week don't count that much, 50 points. Week 6 counts as 168 points, I do believe, so a lot more than normal. But you have had a chance to turn every bit of it in and had every bit of it read and given feedback on. So use your feedback from me to help improve your work. With that being said, I hope that you have a wonderful week this week and that you have some good celebrations around Thanksgiving. And if you don't, know that I'm thinking about you and have a big old hamburger somewhere. Okay? Have a wonderful week number 5.